Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Provincial HSJCC webinar. My name is Trevor Timchak. I'm the chair of the Communications and Knowledge Exchange Committee, and I will be your host today. This webinar will be moderated by Sophia Hussein, who is the Director of Policy at the John Howard Society of Ontario. She will introduce herself shortly. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. The webinar will conclude at 1:30 p.m. We will be enabling the chat box shortly. You can leave comments in there. However, to make it easier to sift through questions, we ask that you use the Q&A box. There will be a dedicated Q&A period at the end of our webinar. The webinar is being recorded. The recording, slides, and resources will be emailed to you following the webinar. It will also be posted on the HSJCC's website and YouTube site. We will hold a few minutes at the end of the webinar for a short survey to hear your feedback from today's session. The survey will also be emailed to you following the webinar. The Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee network is comprised of 38 local committees, 14 regional committees, and 1 provincial HSJCC. Each HSJCC is a voluntary collaboration between health and social service organizations, community mental health and addictions organizations, and partners from the justice sector, including Crown attorneys, judges, police services, and correctional service providers. Please visit our website for more information. It now gives me great pleasure to first introduce you to our moderator, Sophia Hussein.
Thanks so much, Trevor. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today for the second webinar in the series on housing. I wanted to briefly introduce myself and the organization that I come here from. So for those who may not be familiar, the John Howard Society of Ontario is a provincial nonprofit organization. We do research, policy development, public education, and evaluation of programs focusing on prevention, reintegration, and systemic change in the criminal justice space. And we work closely with the 19 JHS local offices that provide programs and services across the province as part of a network. The topic today, housing and homelessness, has been a key focus area for our work for some time, and we recently wrapped up a 2-part project on the subject. Our first report, No Fixed Address, analyzed over 10 years worth of data on admissions to Ontario correctional facilities of individuals who had no fixed address, i.e. no stable permanent address, at the time of their admission to a correctional institution. And what we found was that Ontario's provincial correctional facilities are incarcerating a proportionally larger number of people experiencing homelessness now than at any point in the last 15 years. And there are also regional differences and demographic differences across that data set as well. The second report, entitled Locked Up, Locked Out, outlined findings from consultations with key experts across the province. We spoke to 175 people through surveys and interviews, people with lived experience, to ground the provincial admissions data in the qualitative lived experience of people who have endured homelessness and incarceration, and understand the unique issues that they face navigating the housing market and identifying solutions that could serve to improve outcomes. So there's some key findings that we found. We know that incarceration causes and perpetuates homelessness. 40% of participants stated having their own place before they were incarcerated, but this went down to 21% immediately after release. And many participants also talked about a lack of adequate services inside correctional institutions and gaps in release planning, meaning that people are coming out with acute unmet needs. And all of this exists within a greater context in the province of a homelessness and housing crisis. A recent report from AMO found that more than 80,000 people are known to be homeless in Ontario, and this number is likely higher due to underreporting and research limitations. So that brings us to our topic today. The Bridge Modular Community in Peterborough offers programming and shelter through modular units to people experiencing homelessness. And I'm so excited to be joined by Debbie and Claire from the Elizabeth Fry Society of Peterborough to learn more about the initiative. So maybe to start us off, I will turn it over to Claire and Debbie, if you could tell us a little bit about the Bridge Modular Community.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Claire Belting, and I am the manager of Justice Services for the Elizabeth Fry Society. I will hand it over to Debbie in just a moment, and if everyone's okay, I will begin with a land acknowledgement. So as I've said, my name is Claire Belting and I work for the Elizabeth Fry Society in Peterborough. It is located in the traditional territory of the Mississauga people. Today, I would like to recognize that we are visitors and settlers to the city of Peterborough. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties, considered today as Mississauga lands, which are ceded lands belonging to 7 First Nations communities, including Alderville First Nation, the Chippewas of Rama, Beausoleil, Georgina Islands, Curve Lake, Hiawatha, and Scugog Islands First Nations. We are grateful for the opportunity to work and meet here. We thank past, present, and future generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of these lands and still do. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to our communities. We extend our acknowledgement to also recognize the contributions of Métis and Inuit people, both in shaping and strengthening this community and country as a whole. This recognition is connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. Thank you. Debbie, are you available?
Sorry, just unmuting my screen, getting myself unmuted, and I've shared the video. Okay. Hi, I'm Debbie Carriere. I'm the Executive Director of Elizabeth Fry Society of Peterborough, and I'm happy to be here today to share with you about our project and the remarkable achievements in this project. The Bridge Modular Housing Community in Peterborough opened November 27th, 2023. So we've been in operation for roughly 15 months. Just a little about the site is that we have 50 modular units, and each of the units are 107 square feet per unit. They all have heating, air conditioning, and electricity. There's a separate building that has 5 washrooms and 5 showers. The site has 24/7 supports on site. There are 4 staff 24/7. We also have a separate community building, which includes laundry, kitchen area, additional washrooms, facilities, and common space and different offices where services can be provided inside the building. This is a visual so that you can see what is offered with a unit when a person comes to the site. So each unit comes with a bed and bedding. It comes with a fridge. It comes with a dresser, side table lamp, laundry basket, and a few things just to get started in the unit. There's a window at the back of the unit and on the front of the door. And I'll show you in the slide after this one where the bathroom is located, but I wanted to start with this one to give a visual of where this site is located. So one of the interesting things about our project is that it is located in the downtown area. Some of these sites that are currently operating are operating on the outside of the city limits, but ours is operating right in the downtown. And if you look to the left of this slide, you can see that there are homes that back onto where the site is. It says there on the bridge site, and so that site where it says bridge site was the site of 175 tents at sort of the peak of the encampment that we had. So about 175 tents were in that parking lot, and there was a city building that was operating an overnight shelter, and then the encampment was beside this. And this is what the city was responding to with this 175 bed encampment. And the decision was made to put the modular program right where people were and had been for many years. It's right off the main street in the downtown. So when the site became under construction, you can see down at the bottom, it says encampment during build. In order to build the site, the encampment was moved into a parking lot there at the bottom so that they could actually build the site. In the next slide, you can see an overview of the site. So there you can see on the right, that gray building is the 5 washroom and shower building. You can see our neighbors directly on the back of our fence. And then you can see how the 50 units are there. And at the bottom right is the security entry to the site. And over to the left is the community building where we operate all of our programs out of. Sorry, I thought you were going. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here. We can see from this timeline, Debbie, that this is the modular community was created in quite a short window of time. Can you tell us a little bit about how it came together and so quickly, and were there any barriers to getting it up and running?
Yeah, so it is quite remarkable how quickly this was put in place. So you can see from this timeline here that in 2022, because of the encampment and the increased homelessness in our community, a state of emergency was declared. And in March 2023, the City of Peterborough received an increase in provincial funding. And it was at that time that the city workers, they'd had many people sort of approach the city with these ideas of modular communities. And the city workers brought together all the leaders from the local not-for-profits, and a few people with lived experience, and said, we think we want to put this idea through council, and what we want to just bring this to council is your buy-in and your support for this as a concept. There were no details at that time. We're going to bring the concept forward, and if council approves this, then we're going to put it into. We're going to figure it out. So in May 2023, council did approve that plan. And what is remarkable is then you can see in September 23, they relocated the encampment and started building. So it took 4 months only for them to start the build. And we moved people in within 6 months. So one of the things to take away from this and looking at housing crisis is that with all hands on deck approach, this is something that can be implemented quickly. We had a huge commitment to get people in before winter. And on the day that we moved people in, November 27th, it was a very cold day. We were going to move 5 people in per day for the first 3 days and then give a pause. But there was a blizzard, and we moved 27 people in 3 days. And again, just 6 months after we had the approval of concept, there were a few barriers, and I can talk about these a little bit later. But again, with such a tight timeline, the day we opened, we had the people on site still installing the cameras. So it was this commitment to move forward no matter what we faced that had it open in that time. And there were quite a few barriers that were these learnings that we had in trying to establish this. So initially the city was going to be the operator of the site and hold all the contracts. It was learned in the process of establishing it that there's many barriers to a city holding those kinds of things, like the insurance for the site. So that's how we became the operators as well as the service providers. Initially, we were just the service providers, but for things like insurance and stuff, we had to hold the insurance for the site. And so there were a lot of things that were learned with just the processes and how this can happen in a city that sort of delayed the process, but really 6 months was quite remarkable for us to get this off the ground.
That is remarkable. And to get it just before the winter is amazing too. You never know what the weather is going to be in November. You mentioned this just briefly, but can you talk a little bit about the administration and structure of the program? And one thing that struck out to me that you just talked about, and we've heard from folks who have run programs across the province, is sometimes it's ideal to have different entities acting as landlord and operator. So you kind of have a separation between those who are running the programs and services and those that are operating the housing initiative. Can you share your thoughts on that and how it works for the Bridge community?
Absolutely. So that's something that we sort of do in all of our housing programs. And we learned this early on, that it was really a challenge to be the person enforcing the rules and the support person. So to be handing out evictions, warning letters, it really operates well to have a landlord who is enforcing those, and we're making sure they get enforced on the site, but we're not the people who are producing those, right? So we work collaborative with the landlord. So really key to this whole process is the occupancy agreement. And people use these occupancy agreements often in transitional housing. And what the occupancy agreement is that it allows you an exemption from the Landlord Tenant Act based on somebody engaging in rehabilitation. So it's really good to have that sort of separation. So the way that ours is set up is that the site is owned by the City of Peterborough. And so there's oversight by bylaw in conjunction with the City of Peterborough. But there's a landlord, which is a subsidiary of Peterborough, which is Finally a Home, who actually, they have the one thing they have insurance on is the actual unit itself. And so they are responsible for the unit and who lives in that house, and they enter an occupancy agreement with all the rules with them. And then we operate the site to make sure all of those rules are being enforced and that we're supporting people to be successful on the site. So this sort of multi-layer allows us that ability to be both supportive and also have, you know, us be able to maintain what is in our occupancy agreements.
That's great. I'm going to swing back to that in a minute, but in terms of the next piece here, can you talk a little bit about the common needs and barriers facing clients and what kind of programs the Bridge community has to meet their needs?
So the one of the things we learned very quickly is that there has to be a significant period of stabilization. And there's multiple needs within that need to be met when people who have been chronically homeless. This program is for people with complex needs who are chronically homeless. That there are a number of basic needs that have to be provided. And one of the challenges significantly is around food. And so when we opened this program, we started with one daily meal being provided. That is what we are providing currently through the city is this one supper meal. But since then, we've also included, we have a number of volunteer groups who come in. That's sort of the breakfast meal you're seeing there, who provide either like a breakfast, or we have crock pots with soup and stuff to ensure that people are meeting their basic needs around food. We also have 24/7 crisis support on the site. So our team is there. As I said, mentioned, there's 4 staff. We are engaging with the residents. We are outside, engaging, mitigating any issues that are on the site, supporting any crisis. There's lots of crisis work around mental health. We have personalized care plans and housing case management. So we are helping people achieve goals based on the care plan that they create with their worker. And we are trying to move people to other housing opportunities once stabilization happens. And we're finding like 6 months stability before someone is even ready to look at those options is sort of the norm. We have a lot of on-site services, which includes doctors. So many people who have been living outdoors have extreme health conditions that need attention. And so we have doctors on our site in our doctor's office weekly. And we have also a series of external referrals that happen for a variety of needs to be met through those care plans.
That's great. And I want to pick up on the piece around the doctors, because I know even speaking to folks with lived experience, sometimes we hear not only are there acute health needs, but there's also stigma associated with going into certain other health services, even emergency rooms sometimes, so people avoid that. So I think having doctors on site is a really, really great asset here. Can you tell us a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of residents? And you mentioned the occupancy agreement. And the fact that, you know, these sort of housing initiatives are not bound by the Residential Tenancies Act. Can you talk a little bit about how you ensure procedural fairness for residents?
Absolutely. So we created the occupancy agreement, obviously, with our landlord. And while we're not governed by the Landlord Tenant Act, we certainly observe what's in the Landlord Tenant Act by ways of fair procedure in terms of things like how much, if you get evicted, how much time you have to get your belongings and things like that. But the rules include that someone has to participate in a care plan. So that's part of being there. Those care plans can be very different. They can vary from and it's all depending on what someone wants to do, but you have to participate in some kind of care plan. So it could be just keeping my room clean. It could just be stabilizing for 6 months, but it could be things as more involved as accessing treatment services or anything like that. So it's based on where somebody's at. People do pay rent, and so the occupancy agreement stipulates the amount of rent, which is your housing portion of your Ontario Works or ODSP, or 30% of your income if you're not on either of those. It includes a responsibility for guests, because guests are one of the most challenging parts of operating a site like this. There's various site expectations in terms of how many belongings can be outside your unit, different rules, and there's a zero tolerance for violence. Within the OA, there is a dispute resolution panel that needs to be set up by the legal concepts of an OA, occupancy agreement. In order, any time somebody is evicted or has a warning letter or anything that they are disputing, they have the ability to go before a panel that is made up of someone from all the three organizations involved. So a representative of the city, a representative of Elizabeth Fry, and a representative of Finally a Home. All of those individuals have to be people who are not directly involved in the site, and they hear the dispute from both sides and they make decisions. So there is a that is built into the OA as a resolution to any disputes. And so I also had put on the bottom of this slide, just to make sure I mentioned that the initial residents for the site were 50 individuals who were living at the encampment, and it was the outreach workers who identified people who may be able to be housed on the site, who had the most acute needs, who had been living outside the longest, who could be supported. Once the initial 50 came in, we now do our selection from the city's by name list, the coordinated access list. So all of our residents are high acuity. They all face barriers to access traditional city shelters. So there are multiple barriers for why they're not being able to be in the shelters. And often we just don't have enough beds, but someone who has not been accessing those services is getting priority into the modular housing community.
That's great. I'd love to hear about success. And can you also define how you define success, how you measure success in this case?
Yeah, so one of the there's multiple ways we're trying to look at success, and one of the things we didn't want to do specifically is just look at how many people move on from this housing, because there's so many ways in which we can measure success that is beyond that, because that may take a long time for some people, and they may never actually they may have to live here as long as it's operating. But so there's many ways in which we want to look at success. And so one of the first and easy ways for us initially was one that really was important to our community, because we had an encampment. There was a significant number of calls being made to police and fire and ambulance on a daily basis. And the city sort of looked at the average. It was about 5 calls a day. And so by putting in the modular community with all of the supports, there was an immediate 90% reduction in emergency calls. We had, I think, in our first 4 months, 4 calls. And so that's significant difference, right? And even in this past quarter, we had no calls to police at all. We had 7 calls to ambulance over 3 months for health-related concerns. So again, that's one of the, like, from an outwards community, that was one of the things that was really important in the success of this site, was just a stabilization. So just more about the community itself is that we saw very early on outside agencies who work with the individuals who lived here, who said that they saw significant changes in physical appearance after people moved in, and they looked healthier, they looked more rested. Of course, that comes with a locked door, safety, warmth. And they were seeing, we saw a lot of success for people on the sites. They were reconnecting with family. We have people engaging with agencies like never before. We've had people who have found employment. And of course, we do have some people who have moved to permanent housing. We also implemented a work program that is on the site. We have 10 employees who are employed as cleaners, doing gardening, doing site maintenance. So that's another success of people moving into employment. And recently, one of the people who moved out actually was able to, she was a cleaner and she found cleaning work outside of the site when she moved into her next housing. Sorry, I think you might have had a question.
I was gonna go back to some of the relationship with the neighbors. And you had shown the picture before too that had neighbors just behind one of the walls of the unit. I'm really curious about your engagement with the neighbors, the surrounding community. Did you do targeted outreach like in that small timeline before setting up the community? Do you do ongoing outreach, and how's that been? What's that experience been like for you?
Great, because I think I kind of skipped that. Thank you. What the city did with the neighborhood is they decided to forge ahead without engaging the community right at the beginning, as they wanted to build this and they knew there was going to be a lot of people who were not in support of this, and they had to just move ahead, knowing that they had enough. Knowledge, but that this could be successful. So they just moved ahead. Once they moved ahead, they created a neighborhood community committee where they had an outside facilitator come in and have representatives from the surrounding community, it was the very near neighbors, come in and talk about concerns they had. And these were varied concerns. And we started to work with the community to try to make it better for them. So it was things like they were like, oh, there's a lot of garbage in the neighborhood. So we just planned a rally and we went and cleaned the whole neighborhood. Had problems with the lights. We tried to fix those sorts of things that could make this fit better into the community and make them feel better about it. And that I have to say the neighbors were quite angry at first. They had had a lot for that encampment had been there for 2 years. And with all of those calls, you can imagine how that felt to be in that community. But it really quieted the community and stabilized the community. And we then saw a complete turnaround. And now the committee's been just like, isn't even meeting anymore. At some point, they asked us if we could take down the fence. They wanted to come on and be engaged in things like the food and stuff like that. So there has been a complete acceptance now. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say complete. Sorry, I'll say majority acceptance of the site. And so that's quite significant to see that kind of turnaround and that engagement with the community once it was established and they could see successes. Just a couple of other successes before we move on to more of the justice related stuff is that our site is filled to capacity. We have about a 2-week turnover at most of units if anybody leaves for any reason. So we constantly have 50 residents on site. Of our residents, 32 of the residents have been housed for over a year and counting, which is quite a significant amount of stability. We've had 6 residents move to transitional supportive housing. 2 of them moved with employment. They continued employment when they left. We have 1 move to inpatient treatment. We have 2 more moving into housing in the next month, so that'll be 8 total. We also have a high number of Indigenous people on our site. So this picture behind in this slide is of our cultural room, and we have 40% of our residents are Indigenous. So we have an integrated cultural program on the site that provides supports to our residents who are Indigenous, and it has a variety of different programs that are operating on the site.
That's great. I mean, considering it's only been a little over a year, that's a lot of success in a really short time. And you mentioned the justice piece. So I think that's really important. We know even from sort of the research I was talking about at the beginning, homelessness and conflict with the law go hand in hand. Making assistance with legal matters really important. And a lot of people have experiencing homelessness both as a cause and result of conflict with the law. So can you tell us a little bit about the services that you provide around ongoing criminal matters? And I'm curious, was that always in the plans for the modular community, or is that something that you kind of adapted along the way, realizing there's a need?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Debbie, if I could get you to go to the next slide, please. So it definitely was something that was always in the plans. However, stability, ensuring people were not living in survival mode anymore and being able to make, cognizant legal decisions, was kind of a first priority along with building therapeutic relationships. So it was really important for that trust, and relationship to be established with on-site case managers before any of our justice team came in to assist with that. Essentially, Elizabeth Fry is definitely known for its justice support, so we provide assistance with gaining disclosures and applications for legal aid. Many of the people living on site, because the building didn't open right away, didn't have a way to appear virtually in court or call and connect with the Crown Attorney's office, or just needed significant supports. So once that trust was built, we were able to bring in community partners as well, to do advocacy work. Then we established relationships within the courts so the service users and residents on site could feel comfortable. Many of them faced a lot of barriers, and due to them being overly criminalized for things beyond their control, had a deep distrust for the court system and for the local police. So it was very important to establish those relationships and work with police as well. We started to establish the relationships with the community police officers in the area, having them actually stop arresting people in public and instead coming to the site where we could prepare residents for the fact that they were coming. We had a significant amount of people with outstanding bench warrants. And because of that fear, many were afraid to leave the site. Many would hide in their units if they saw a police officer parked outside of the site. So establishing that relationship, so it was definitely the delivery of those bench warrants was done in a more compassionate way, helped with building those relationships, and also kind of dealing with the stigma and the bias that comes with people that are overly criminalized, and the community understanding the reason people were committing thefts. Primarily in the downtown core, there was a lot of anger at first. So working with local businesses for them to have a deeper understanding of what was happening in these people's lives and simply that they were just trying to survive. And kind of rebuilding that relationship with them was a big priority as well. Debbie, could you move to the next slide, please? So as you saw, so the most important part was primarily what they were already doing was case management, but just moving over to court case management. Access to legal counsel was a big one. People feeling uncomfortable with attending court because of their attire, things like that. We would have case managers go with them and do advocacy. We did a lot of advocacy around outstanding matters not moving to judicial pretrials right away. So people had their rights respected and the courts had an understanding of why these outstanding bench warrants weren't resolved previously. So that is all covered essentially there in the slides that you see in front of you. Debbie, I'll just get you to move the next slide, please. We are a very fortunate community because we have two wonderful specialized court streams, one of them being a therapeutic community support court, which supports people with cognitive difficulties, mental health concerns, or substance use addictions, or a combination. of them. And then we have a specialized Indigenous Peoples Court. They use a multidisciplinary approach. So when you look back at the beginning, when we're trying to build those community relationships, it's really to benefit those residents while going through the court process. We have a large number of them who are involved in both of the specialized courts. And the reason for that is because we do not want people to be overly criminalized for things that are social determinants to their health, so poverty and trauma. We do a lot of advocacy for release from custodies as well. So many of the justice of the peaces are looking for people to have housing in order to be released from custody. We also, many of us know from working in the justice field that being in custody is really not assisting with rehabilitation, where a multidisciplinary community approach is really guiding that. So we have our own bail verification and supervision program as well. So with the mix of housing, the bail verification, and then a court support worker, justices felt more at ease about releasing people from custody. So advocacy, like I said, it's a big part of our role, bringing an understanding that the residents that we support and many involved with justice are victims themselves, and having the community gain a better understanding of that, as I've said before, helps to lower that stigma and the bias surrounding it. So through the advocacy that we have done, we've had a lot of successes in this program. So we have had many charges fully withdrawn, lowering sentences, conditional and absolute discharges, and the advocacy that's done in Indigenous Peoples Court, because people are allowed to complete healing plans, has allowed connection to their community, culture, and elders, and has actually lowered the rates of incarceration for those convicted. And through our other therapeutic court, we have seen a very large reduction in recidivism. So these are just our stats here. So we had 3 residents who had 8 charges that were withdrawn by the Crown Attorney and Case Management Court due to advocacy. So though that was advocacy done before they even started through Case Management Court, going back to the Crown Attorney with those established relationships that we have built to say, these were the circumstances that have brought this person before the courts. It's really unfair to criminalize this person for that. We've also had charges withdrawn by facilitating entrance into residential treatment facilities. And at this time, none of the residents have outstanding bench warrants anymore. Those were resolved very quickly upon the justice team, and there's now a full justice worker actually at the Bridges site who helps navigate people through the justice system. So we've had 25 people engaged in the court support program, and we've had approximately 50 charges withdrawn by the courts due to treatment plan completion. So this is all their hard work being recognized by the courts. We have a 90% compliance rate right now, and 90% of the residents who have had court matters have had no recidivism. So we're pretty proud of the work we do. We're very proud of the residents as well. Like I said, once those established relationships were built, they really themselves wanted to get this behind them. And it was important that these things were resolved. We saw such a concern with putting and guiding people to residential treatment and through treatment plans, and then them making great progress and that being paused due to outstanding bench warrants. So it was really important to navigate that and get those resolved right away.
This is so impressive. Seeing some comments come through as well. I think others are really just appreciating all of these successes and these statistics. And I think it really speaks to just being able, the importance of having the stability of shelter, a roof over one's head, being connected to services, having those programs be really integrated. I think that, you can clearly see the benefit of that in terms of bail supervision, in terms of compliance with release plans and completing treatment plans. So I think that's incredible. I, as we move on, I just have a question about how this, it's modular housing. How does it fit within sort of the broader framework of homelessness and housing initiatives in the city? And where do you kind of see, what role do you think it plays in sort of the broader need for housing of all kinds?
I think the greatest place that this fit is stabilization between having been chronically homeless and then being able to take advantage of the transitional housing units when they become available. And I know in our community, but certainly probably in most of the communities where I come from, there's not enough transitional housing either, supportive housing. And so it's that interim step that allows us to bring all of the services to a person that they are interested in participating in, that allows them to be more successful when they can move to supportive housing and then to other, even, to move to a place that is outside of that housing and in other housing that doesn't require support. So it's just part of that continuum of giving people some stability. So it really fits into being able to help people meet people's needs and help them move forward in on the housing.
Yeah, and I think, I've heard other folks talk about sort of modular housing. It's really, I like how it is put in between the emergency shelter and the transitional housing, because it is, in an ideal world, we have housing for people to move into, and there are more stable options. But the fact of the matter is we have encampments across Ontario. People are sleeping rough in really terrible conditions, and we have this need to build housing of some kind to provide people a shelter and dignity. And so these modular housing options that you've shown can be put up so quickly, can really fill that gap and help move people into other types of housing. So that's great. As we're sort of wrapping up, and I love these pictures, I think all of the images are amazing. Can you share what opportunities you see for the future of Bridge Modular Community?
So one of the things that is when this project started, we had a 2-year agreement. And so the City Council approved for only 2 years. And so now it has gone back to council and it has been approved to stay here as long as funding occurs. So we are getting the extension and expecting at least the 4-year timeline, if not more. So that was a really key piece of this, is the city needing to see that it works, and then being able to commit to more. One of the things that is needed and is luckily happening is we need a way to support people to move into the next step. All of our work as the service providers and the operators is spent on stabilizing the site. It's a lot of work. There's 50 people living there with very complex needs. And so our community has been approved for our Heart Hub, and it's going to operate out of this site, which brings a variety of specialized services to help people make that move. And it also brings with it a lot of rent supplements, additional housing opportunities. So all of that is going to allow us to facilitate that work of moving people forward.
Great. That's great. And you've talked a bit about some of these, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the lessons you've learned from operating the Bridge community so far that maybe you'd want other folks to hear in thinking about these initiatives in other communities.
Yeah, I thought a lot about these and I wrote down some key words of this. So it's like, first of all, you need an all hands on deck approach. It took all of the departments of the city to make this happen in 6 months. It took all of our commitment and all of our partners' commitments to make this open and then operate And we had to be really innovative in meeting all of the challenges that happened and willing to change what we needed to change. So again, we opened without the video cameras. We had to be adaptable to that. We had some people who were, we couldn't set a day for them to move in. It was challenging. We had to meet people where they were at. We had someone who moved in at 2 a.m. There was no problem. We had staff on site. We could make all of those things happen, and we just had to be really adaptable to know that we needed to meet people's needs. We also did that by allowing people to bring in a lot of belongings at first, because expecting them to move out of the encampment, come here without belongings, and then over time we had to decrease the amount of belongings on the site, which is also another big challenge. And I think the other big piece is that you have to persevere even with the negative comments and things that are happening around you, because this site is speaking for itself. The successes are being shown across multiple ways, and so you have to be able to continue that despite the negative energy that people will bring from your community. Every time something goes before council, it's a narrow pass. There's always people speaking out against, and so you have to believe in what you're doing and be able to persevere to bring something like this forward and have the success that we're seeing here.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And the more that some of these happen, so now, if other folks are trying to do this in their community, they can bring forward the successes of the Bridge community and show what this kind of thing can really do, and hopefully change some minds and ease the way forward for other jurisdictions. Thank you so much. I want to open this up to other Q&As, and maybe we'll just go over, I know there's a couple in the chat that Claire and Debbie were answering, but maybe just so everybody can hear them. The first was that the entire location appears to be fenced. And is the entrance and exit only by the security office, or are there multiple in and out locations? And I know, Claire, that you responded to this in the chat, but I was wondering if, just for the sake of the whole group, if you wanted to provide a bit of information, because I was also noticing that when you showed the picture. I think that's a really interesting feature.
So it is entirely fenced in. That is, I'm going to say, after we operated this, it's for the protection of the people that live there. More than anything. And the guests were really hard to manage. And so it really was important for this to be an enclosed site so that we could manage what was happening around the community. There's actually two entry points. There's this main entry point, which is security, but obviously there's a safety entry as well at the back, which we don't use unless under safety reasons. So we have had to have people who have concerns about maybe someone out front that we have to take through the back door. We also have that as an option for fire and ambulance and all of that. But typically people come through the front gate, and that's how we control who is on our site, to provide, a safe space for our residents who often have not lived in a space of safety. And one of the things when they surveyed the residents early on, that was the most important thing to them, is that they felt safe on the site.
Absolutely, that's great.
Yeah.
There was another question about the feedback that the program got from surrounding neighbors, and I think you went over that quite well in the presentation. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
I mean, the only thing I would say is that it was remarkable to see people change from not wanting this there in the downtown, and to now wanting to be a part of it. That's quite remarkable. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So that's where I will leave it.
Oh, that's great.
I will.
Okay, go ahead, Claire.
Excuse me. I will add, Debbie, and I'm not sure you may have already covered it, that I was hopeful we could talk about the resident advisory committee as well.
We didn't. So sorry, yeah, we need to add that back to our presentation. So a newer committee that has arisen is a resident advisory committee. We always knew we needed one. We just had to let the site itself stabilize before we instituted this. So the same people who are running were running the community advisory created a resident advisory so that the residents had a chance to have a voice, to talk about what they feel was working well and not working well, They've come together at least 6 times now. They've created a newsletter. It's a really good way for us to communicate changes. For example, I talked about the Heart Hub. It's a great way for us to dispel misconceptions about what's going to be happening on the site. They are going to name the site. The Bridge site is just the site we had from the beginning. So there is going to be, they're going to name their own site. There's a real amazing sense of community here. And so it allows that voice of the people who live on the site to be heard.
That's great. That's a really good addition. I'm glad you brought that up. There was another question about, are pets allowed? And the answer was yes. And I think that's such an important piece. You know, we often hear about folks being offered housing that they can't bring their pets to, or, you know, shelters where that's not an option. And so it's such a great feature to be able to bring folks' pets.
Yeah, that's certainly a barrier to entering shelter sometimes. And it's one that we wanted to make sure we included on the site. And we have lots of safety measures around pets, and people sign a pet agreement about their pet. And we also have, I mean, the rule that is hard to enforce is you can only have the pet you had when you came in. But of course, people want to acquire pets after living there for some time. So we do have a number of pets who have come on since then, but there are rules around making sure your pet is looked after. And so that's a really good one. And that the other thing that is a barrier for shelter is sometimes couples, because couples can't be together in shelters. So one of the things is we do have couples residing on the site. We just give each person their own unit. Just in case there's a relationship breakdown, and their own unit in a different row, just in case. But those were two very important factors that we wanted, that we had feedback from the people as we got to know them in the encampment, was something that they face as a barrier for accessing the shelter.
I think those are great pieces, great lessons to be able to guide other work like this as well. We do have some questions that have come up in the chat, so I'll just go through them. The first is, knowing that housing of all kinds is in short supply, especially permanent supportive housing, how do you facilitate positive exits from the program? And if somebody wanted to stay long term, is that permitted?
So absolutely. We are looking at long-term options. We do recognize that some of our residents will be best supported by this type of environment. So the 24/7 supports are integral to their stability and where they want to be and where we're supporting them to be. We are involved in a number of tables in the community for a transitional housing. So as units become available, we can put our residents forward. I said we have 2 people about to move into housing, and that's exactly what happened. There was a new building that's in Peterborough. Our residents who met the criteria, who were able to be put forward, we put forward, and we have 2 people who have been accepted. We're waiting on a third. So we are involved in all of those places. We do have a housing worker who is not funded by this project, but who is funded by United Way Reaching Home, who also works on the site to try to get people connected to housing opportunities in our community as they arise that are beyond that sort of beyond the by names list sort of network that already exists. So we do work with private landlords and stuff and try to move people when they're ready into those opportunities as well.
Right. And there is a question, you mentioned the Heart Hub. There is a question here, could you explain the Heart Hub? Would love to hear more about it. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about plans for the Heart Hub and how that integrates.
Sure. We know only a little bit about it because there was an announcement, of course, right before the election. So the Heart Hub is being operated by Forecast Addiction Services, who is the main addiction services provider in Peterborough. And so there will be, through that hub, occupational therapists, recreational activities, access to psychiatric care, which is something we've wanted to bring to the site for quite some time. Because when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the difficulty with people accessing doctors offsite, but also psychiatric care is very integral to that. There's going to be peer workers. And so their goal then is to help people move and be more prepared to move out, and then actually support them in those additional units with the additional subsidies that will be there. So their goal is to, begin case management around and supporting people who are ready to move on. And those heart hubs are treatment based. And so they're looking at people who are interested in moving into treatment, which certainly will not be all of our residents, but some of them are interested in looking at substance use treatment options, and that's going to provide those to them.
And that's a good segue to another question we have here related to substance use. We have a question about whether the site offers safe or supervised consumption options for residents.
So this is not a safe consumption site. However, we recognize that just like we can use substances in our own homes, these are people's homes. And so if they use substances, we have a variety of safety measures on site. We do have harm reduction supplies. We have close relationships with lots of our residents. So check-ins to make sure people are safe. Those are the kinds of measures we've instituted. And obviously we have a number of rules around not using in the public shared spaces. But we do want to be safe because we recognize that people in their own homes can access substances. So while we're not a safe consumption site, we do put in a lot of safety measures around use.
Thank you for that. There's a question about staffing. Do you have any problems retaining employees since it is a 24/7 operation?
We're a great employer. We actually have built in a lot of supports around staff, and we've had great retention. It is, I mean, we have coordinators and managers on site as well daily. So there's a lot of support for staff. And we've had critical incidents, we've had debriefings, we've had a lot of support around our staff. So luckily we have had really good staff retention.
Right. There's a question about inspections. Do you conduct inspections of the units periodically?
Yes, so that's in the occupancy agreement. To be able to do that, we do have to make sure that the fire code is being met. So we have to make sure the fire extinguishers are inspected regularly and the fire detectors. So that's important that we have to be able to enter the units to do that. We do have I shouldn't say sometimes. So we have issues with hoarding. So we do have to engage residents in making sure the unit is safe. So we can enter that in those particular things. So we do unit inspections around that. But that's essentially what it is around like the safety. And the occupancy agreement allows us to enter for that reason. And of course, again, trying to match what we should be doing in the winter, we give lots of notice when we can, unless there's an emergency situation. So people are aware, like the day we did the fire extinguishers, everybody was aware that that was the fire inspection day, and they could prepare for that.
Right. And there's a question about what age folks can live in the community. Is it 16, 18?
It's 18. That is an insurance requirement because we can't ensure that there wouldn't be sharps on the site, needles and stuff like that, that anybody on the site has to be over 18, including guests.
Okay, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just seeing that there was another question in the chat here. If you can speak a bit more to efforts, activities being made on site that promote a sense of community for the residents.
Okay, we have a lot of activities that we do. So we do things like movie nights and bingo, and we just did a digital equity program with a community partner in which people who participate in digital equity were able to get cell phones for participating in the program. We do these communal breakfasts, and everybody comes into the community room to get their food every night as well. That allows us to do a check on people who may not be out and about as much. Yeah, just a variety. We've done henna, we've done dream catchers. So we have like activities happening every week, every other day, trying to keep people engaged and things to do. Yeah.
That's great. Well, that's all the questions I'm
Oh, I
seeing.
think Claire wanted to make a comment
Oh,
there.
sorry, I totally missed you, Claire. Please.
That's okay. I just wanted to add about how that links to the justice piece as well. So we have many people who are completing community sentence orders. And for many of them, what we've done is they have either baked items or baked dinners and come down to the site and serve them to the residents. So it's kind of a twofold, both of them kind of gaining something from that experience. So that has been a really lovely connection for us as well.
I think that's such an important piece. The social isolation piece is it's huge, and there's so much emerging research on how much that affects people's outcomes with the criminal courts and their justice journey, and also with in terms of homelessness. And so just having those opportunities to come together is really great. Yeah, I think that's the end of the questions, unless something else comes through. So I'll pass it back to our host here, but thank you so much.
Well, thank you to Debbie and Claire for this fantastic presentation, and to Sophia for guiding this important conversation. I want to ask people to take a moment to provide your feedback on today's webinar. There's a survey link that was just posted in the chat. And I also want to announce that the registration is now open for part 3 of the Housing and Justice webinar. And I think, yes, there's the webinar link. There's the link to the registration. We'll also be sending out another email to folks in the coming days with more details about it. But if you want to register now, you can. Part 3 is about restorative justice housing, Ontario. I want to thank everyone for their questions and for attending today. And again, everything will be posted to the website and YouTube very soon. So look for that in an email that you'll get soon. Thank you, everyone.